So thank you guys for showing up today. This is Garner. I'm the Director of Engineering at Instructure. You might know him, made Canvas. He has over 25 years of experience working in software engineering, consulting, being a leadership at these companies. He's going to be talking about today about CS education and trying to help teachers and students learn more. So I'll hand it off to you.
Cool, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I guess I'll just jump. This is a picture of my son. He's a sophomore in high school now, but this was the start of school in fall 2020, first day of school. So you can see Canvas there. That was a nice picture to throw there. But let's talk a little bit about me first. You know why you should listen to me. So I am a director of engineering and Instructure. Within my department, I have 3 peers, and we cover different areas of our department is called teaching and learning. Canvas is one of Canvas spans all of the teams except one, which is a lot of associated services. I graduated from this fine university in 1997 with CS. We didn't have any of the CS plus stuff, which I was talking to some of the students about earlier today. I was a member of ACM. That's why I'm super excited to be here. Linux Users Group chair for the last 2 years of my time here. I am a father of a freshman. She chose psychology and not CS, so if you want to boo her, she's right there. But yeah, I have a very varied experience, but I've been at Instructure for the last 7 years. It's been really a great home. Instructure was founded in 2008. It was founded by 2 graduate students at Brigham Young University. They were stuck having to use Blackboard, one of our competitors. They hated it. They thought they could do better. They did tours of colleges and got some feedback, and they built Canvas. We've grown since then. We now, fun fact, I have been at Instructure when it's gone public twice, which is a weird thing to say and not very common, but we were public. We went public in late 2015. We were bought by private equity in February of 2020. We went public again in March 2021 because apparently a pandemic was great for the education business. We're headquartered in Salt Lake City, but engineering and our product managers, we are all remote first. We kind of hired, the pandemic accelerated us into that. We were always really flexible and working from home, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to guess everyone in the room is familiar with Canvas. If you're not, please raise your hand, because the slide will go on longer then. So I'm not going to talk about what Canvas is. You guys know it. You guys use it every day in your classes. Hopefully your teachers use it well. I know, at least talking to my daughter at lunch today, at least one TA does not use it well. But I'll tell you some tech facts about Canvas. Canvas is built on Ruby on Rails and always has been. It's open source. You go on GitHub and play with Canvas. There's a couple pieces of Canvas we keep for ourselves that are some allow us to run it at scale the way we do. But if you want to look at how your grade is calculated, you can look at that, and then you can also look at git blame and blame me for all the bugs that I added to the grade calculator. Canvas still is kind of a big monolith. It's still most of what you see when you're interacting with Canvas is in that Ruby on Rails code. Places where it's not, there's some other associated services. We're building a new quiz engine. I don't know if you guys are using our new quiz engine versus our old one, but anytime you look at a PDF or a teacher leaves annotations on a paper you might turn in, that's a service associated with Canvas, but not Canvas itself. But to you guys, it looks all the same. That's fine. Canvas has been on Amazon Web Services from day one. So all of the scaling, all of Jeff Bezos's money to make a rocket, we're helping contribute to that, but we're not possible to have done what we've done the past couple of years without that. Oh, here's a fun fact. This was 2 weeks ago. About 1% of the US population was using us that afternoon. That's our head DBA, we call him Bench. He was tracking some stats, and that was a fun one. So just to kind of give you an idea of where we are today, and it'll go into a little bit of the story of the past couple of years. We have about 22 million unique users every day worldwide. So not only are we in K through 12 schools here and universities here in the US, but we're all over the world. This past week, actually it might have been 2 weeks ago, but my note says this past week, we were averaging about 4 million concurrent users every day. now that we're in the middle of the school season. This is a fun fact because it's all, everyone likes numbers and big numbers. At any one time last week, during like say the busy time of the day, 10 a.m., 3 p.m., there was about 6,500 servers in running in Amazon running campus. That was serving most of North America. But let's go back in time. Diana, this is where you make your appearance. Let's go back in time to February 2020, right before we went into pandemic mode. Let's look where we were as kind of a product, as kind of our record at that point was 1.96 million concurrent users. That happened in the fall of 2019. Usually when people go back to school in the fall is when we see our peak concurrent user numbers. We had a lengthy roadmap of projects. All of the teams, there's 6 teams that work on campus proper. And then when we look at the one associated services, we go up to about 15 or so teams. All of those teams had like 2-3 year roadmaps. We're going to build this, we're going to build this, we're going to build this. This is what we're doing. Here's how we're making education. Today, now that we're out of kind of pandemic mode and back then, we push new Canvas code out into production every 2 weeks. We turn on new features once a month. We would like to turn on features more often, but school administrators like to know what's coming and play with it for a month so they can teach their teachers before they turn it on. It's more of a, it's kind of a heads up, this is coming and changing. Real big feature changes. If we're going to change how the grade book looks, and a lot of you guys don't see that, or we're going to change how students upload assignments, we wait until semester breaks to turn those features on, because anything that big and changes the workflow, we don't want in the middle of the semester, we don't want how you upload a paper to change on it, because that might freak you out. Because when you wait till 11:59 p.m. on the day that homework is due, you want to make sure you know that flow. Let's see, what else do we have? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about what changed, but this should be a big inflection point that all of you guys are old enough to remember. March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization said, hey, y'all, we're in a pandemic. 2 days later, at least those of us in Chicago, is when we started to hide in our houses and go into lockdown. This is also when we as a company started to shift. I can tell you because I went back and looked at Slack. Slack is a great history keeper. So I went back and read about 4 months of Slack over the past 2 to 3 days of, hey, what were we doing in 2020? Like, let's look at like from there. And February, we started going, oh, it's hype. It's not going to be anything. Nothing's going to happen. Oh, this school's closing. Oh, these schools are closing. Oh, New York's closing. Oh, where are we going? What is this going to turn into? So we started to shift gears. Before I talked about what we did to really address that gear shifting, what we had to do, let's talk about why Instructure and why Canvas was in a good place to start. So as I mentioned, we're already in Amazon. We're already in Amazon Web Services. We are already, I hate this marketing phrase, but this marketing phrase we use a lot, cloud native. We take full advantage of our scaling on our web servers, on how we process background jobs, that sort of thing. As a company, we already had some remote workers. We had very flexible work from home schedule. I would work from home 1 or 2 days a week. If I being in the Chicago area, we had an office in Chicago at that time. If I looked at my schedule and saw I was going to be on meetings all day on Zoom talking to people in Salt Lake City, I just stayed home. There's no reason to take a train an hour into the city to sit in a conference room. So we already had these remote work and collaboration tools. We have been using them at this point in the company's history for like 7 years. The other thing that's really cool, I don't know if any of you have had the joy of talking to our support department. You can call and do chats with them. They're all great folks, and they actually had the ability to work remotely. So as schools were having trouble and calling, we could still service them and still help. One of the other things I think is an important thing, some of you might have entrepreneurial dreams and want to go and build your company. So one of the other things to think about is not only do you want to have a good support network, we have a strong community side. Teachers and administrators, all Canvas users, help each other. So we have a lot of user guides, we have a lot of how-tos in there. But teachers and especially tech folks at certain schools will have, here's a script I wrote to do this thing that Canvas doesn't do, but you might want. So we already had this strong community of people helping each other and helping make education better before we went into this. The other thing is, as I already mentioned, I am a parent of a Canvas user. Many of the people that work at Instructure are parents of Canvas users, but also we've been really lucky that many of our staff, including someone like the product director that I'm partnered with, are teachers, have been teachers, and so know education pedagogy. They know what would really help in the classroom or not. And when we started to have to shift, they knew what might help teachers who are used to teaching in the classroom be able to switch to being fully remote. So what did we do? So as I mentioned, we had to make a big pivot. We dropped everything that Taylor Swift's command. No, we dropped everything. All of those roadmaps that I talked about, those 2-3 year visions for all of those teams got thrown out. We said, we can't continue to go this way. We worked, what ended up happening in a couple of short 2-3 days is we broke into, they were called what we call internally work streams. These are areas of focus that are going to be really important to our customers. Then we did something really wild and unusual. Product people, engineering people, attach yourself, go find something useful to do in here, self-organize. So we didn't stay in our normal team. So a normal structured team, engineering would be 7 or so engineers, an engineering manager, a product manager, designer. Those kind of all blew up. Some of them stayed together and worked on some stuff together, but people kind of gravitated towards where they could be most useful. The biggest one, and the one that to this day we're very proud of, is the stay up and scale. We stayed up. A lot of our competitors had a lot of faults, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as people were starting to, have to do education to learn from home or teach from home, they needed to count on us that we were there. As you guys all went through this, but you guys hopefully still made some progress in your education over those couple of years. I know it was tough, but being able to help folks do that was really cool. Everyone else, March 11th, March 13th is like, oh, we're going to take a week off while we figure out what's going on. We were working our asses off to be able to make sure that we would be there for everyone. At the time, we only had one video conferencing partner. Obviously, we needed more. This was, I went back. These 5 come directly out of our announcement in Slack. This one is, we did UX things. We did user experience things. That's how I boil that down. We looked at how we release stuff. So I talked about we do new features once a month. We push out new code, bug fixes and stuff every other week. We had to throw some of that out during times, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I almost jumped a couple slides ahead. And the last thing, communication coordination. We didn't have the ability for a school to do a global announcement. We have that now. Schools are probably abusing it, but we have that now. We also needed to communicate really well with our schools about what we're doing, what the features are, what's going on. I think that's it. But yeah, it was really, we turned to, let's focus on what our customers and what the students who work with our customers need. Let's talk a little bit about those changing patterns, because these are really interesting. When you write software, you go, this is the user story. This is the thing we're going to make happen. That user story is great until there is a seismic shift that blows everything out of the water. So what are some of those things that change that are really interesting? This picture over here is from an article from one school district. I won't say where. I cut off as much as I could, so it's not identifying, because customers don't like when we talk about this sometimes. But what's really interesting is in that first paragraph, it talks about the #1 thing on my bullet points here: login time. So normal US school district shares buses between their grade schools and their middle schools and their high schools. And so high schoolers might start first in the morning. Then maybe the grade schoolers, then maybe the middle schoolers. That's how it works in our school district. So for those schools that use Canvas, that have one-to-one or use Canvas, Some people log in 7:40 in the morning. No third of them, or whatever, how many are in high school? Then another third, the middle school, or the grade schoolers, then another third, the middle school. Sorry. Everyone logged in at the same time, 9 a.m. That's a dramatic load change. We went from here's kind of a constant hum to you can't turn in a paper anymore. Can't hand the teacher a paper anymore. So the volume of, say, assignments being turned in via Canvas went way higher. So teachers no longer had, you can turn in the paper to, you have to upload it. Or, hey, we're going to do this pop quiz on paper. It's now a quiz within Canvas. Our content created and hosted in Canvas greatly expanded. So syllabuses, here's something I want you to read. Again, that change of not being in the same place. Like, oh, I printed it out so you guys can read it. Oh, I put the PDF up in the file section of the course so you can read it. Another very interesting thing, we have a product called Studio that works along with Canvas. Studio, for all intents and purposes, let's call it white label YouTube. We recreated YouTube, because the problem with YouTube is when you put teaching material on YouTube, all of the trolls of the internet jump in the comments. So we have a video product that does a lot of that same video hosting, although we've got some advanced features focused at teaching in it, but that went wild. And you guys have probably gone through that where you watched a video of a lecture versus being in assembly hall or something. The other thing that really changed, and this is a real big one, is our amount of what I will call novice users really changed. So our school district is 1-to-1. Every student from like kindergarten on gets a Chromebook, I think these days. But when they have, like, when the kindergartner through 5th grade folks have a Chromebook, when they're using it, the teachers there the first couple of days of school are teaching them how to use a Chromebook and that sort of thing, and how to turn it assignments. They didn't have that. Some of the schools just leapt right in. So that became, not only did we have students who were not familiar or as familiar with using Canvas, we had teachers who had access to Canvas but didn't really use it. And so they still needed to know. And the ones that I feel the worst for is we had a bunch of parents who suddenly had to become experts in Canvas. Just to kind of give you an idea of why I feel bad for parents, let's think of a first grade assignment, circle all the mammals on this picture. At that time, we didn't really have a feature for students to do that all online. We do now, which is awesome. So what would have to happen? Well, a parent would have to help the student download that paper and print it out. Then the student would do the homework. So 10 minutes of figuring out how to print out a PDF, 30 seconds of circling the mammals, and then parents would have to take a picture and upload it in Canvas. And it's this big mechanical process. We streamlined that a lot. You can now turn in pictures of homework from the mobile app. We now have the ability for you to do assignments, do drawing assignments right on, it's a PDF annotation tool. Students don't necessarily know that, but we didn't have that then. And so it became very difficult for parents to be able to get, to be able to help. And so that novice user part went up. The other thing, I live my life in trimesters. There's summer, where we're spending all summer getting ready for fall start. And this is a very US-centric. We don't call it fall start anymore, we call it peak season, because it's not fall in the Southern Hemisphere when school starts for us here. But fall here in North America, fall is big time for us. January is big time for us. Because that's when most of our people are coming. When the pandemic hit, we're in the middle, we were done, right? Man, we did it in January. This is awesome. It's March. Let's start writing new features and focusing on our Instructure conferences, our customer conference in the summer. So we go like, here's the cool things we're bringing you. So again, we had pivoted suddenly in March. We're in the middle of the semester. We're used to like looking way farther forward. We have to focus on now. We have to pretend like we're going into fall start today. And then most schools, you guys might remember, we're still kind of figuring stuff out through March through May, June, like kind of like, I know our school district said, you can't get a lower grade. You can get a higher grade, but you can't get lower than when we started going into pandemic. And so they were still figuring stuff out. The other thing is we were kind of restarting spring semester without knowledge of what was going to happen. Normally, we know schools will go like, hey, it's fall. We have this many new enrollments, we have this many new accounts, and we can use that for capacity planning so we can figure out some scaling issues in advance. We were going in blind. So just to kind of give you an idea of the dramatic difference, the blue line on this graph is 2020. The red line in that graph is 2019. We went, if you remember earlier in the talk, I said our high water mark here was 1.96 million users. This is 5.9 million. We more than doubled our concurrent users in 6 months. And that is, hopefully, you start some social media app or whatever, it takes off like crazy. We're doing that anyway. For us, we were doing a slow build up school year after school year as more people became customers of Instructure, users of Canvas. This has some implications that I'll talk about in a little bit when you go from here to 2x here. But you can see dramatically over 2019, here, this is about people's spring breaks ended after kind of most schools like, we're going to figure out what we're doing with the pandemic during spring break. We already jumped up. But when this is about the time, April, May, June is when everyone was learning, we're not going back to school in person in the fall. And that leads to a giant jump. So what did we learn through this? Or what are some lessons that I learned through this? First of all, shout out to the Reflections Projections Committee, because I gave them an awful title of lessons learned through this, and they changed it to reflections. I'm like, that one word makes it better. Thank you. I wish I came up with a better title. The first lesson is, hey, that's great that we're ready. Were our customers ready? Were our partners ready? In a lot of cases, no, they weren't. We had some really interesting problems. So I know here at the university, thanks again to my daughter, when you log into Canvas, you actually log into your authentication services Office 365. You don't log into Canvas directly. And that's not unusual. A lot of schools do single sign-on systems or they're running their own authentication server. One large school district in California had a problem. Canvas was ready. Their authentication services were not. Remember that thing I talked about a little bit ago? The slow burn of the 3 phases of school logging in over a couple hours to here we all are at 9 a.m. Their authentication server was not ready for the load. They actually fell down. Students couldn't log into Canvas because technically they couldn't log into their school. But what did the news say? Canvas was down. I know they're saying we had a rough past 2 weeks. You guys might have noticed Canvas down a little bit over the past 2 weeks. So we do have faults. We have times when we're not there, but it's very interesting. Like the system that you build, what can you do, or what are the interaction points? Are those folks ready? So that school district spent. I don't remember if they were hosted directly or if they were in some cloud service or whatever, but they had to throw more equipment, more capacity at the problem in short order, like over a day or two, to be able to meet that. Video streaming partners is an interesting one. We have, as I mentioned before, when we went into the pandemic, we only had one video streaming partner. They fell over immediately. Everyone in Canvas was like video conferencing, and they boom, went over. So we worked very quickly with Zoom with some other providers. So there's 3 or 4 that are supported now, but that became a really big problem. Like, so people get into Canvas, but they didn't, couldn't do any class discussion, couldn't do any interactive stuff. There's a standard in ed tech called the Learning Tool Interoperability Standard called LTI tools. LTI tools are great. Most of the time, you guys don't know you're using them. They interact seamlessly with whatever LMS that they're working through. They just kind of end up in a frame. There's hundreds of them out there. Schools can choose to interact with them, but they also had that problem where they couldn't keep up. A good example is there is a plagiarism detection tool that's out there. A lot of people use that with Canvas. It stopped processing papers, and people, again, do people call them? No. They call our support. So this graph is actually from about the 3rd week in that pandemic, sometime in April, of the calls that were coming in to our support folks. This is the top 10. Notice the top two, not a Canvas issue. School authentication. Not a Canvas issue, Zoom, actually top three are not a Canvas issue. They're giving us some Canvas issues. Enrollments, we'll talk about that in a minute too. So people came to us, like the LTI tools are great. We normally want that seamless experience, so students don't have to think about where they're going or what they're doing. This is a case where that seamless experience turned into some more support calls. Again, what did the news say? Canvas is having an issue. And that's okay. You know, that's what we get for being a big player. Second lesson. Features are great. Sometimes they're not. I'll talk about the video that's playing over there on the side for a second, in a second. But we did a lot of really cool things right away. Knowing that a lot of teachers were new to Canvas, our school district was going to adopt Canvas in 2021. They flipped it on suddenly in 2020 for teachers. We had new user tutorials that were added for teachers. The little things that pop up like over here, this is this, and over here, click on this, it does this thing. This is what I personally worked on. If you go into Canvas and you bring up your user thing on the left, you just might see the thing that says mobile QR login. That didn't exist before the pandemic because we knew a lot of people in their homes don't have a laptop or computer per person needing to school or work in their house. And so mobile apps, mobile phones, tablets, we're going to fill that void. We need to make it easy to help them help parents help students log in on those devices. This is an interesting one. Adjusting due dates in bulk. When you suddenly stop school for 3 days, all the program due dates get wrong. So being able to do that. Expanded video content, and then the improved workflow for teachers. There were a lot of things, this is one of the other kind of side lessons. There's a lot of pain you can tolerate when you have time. Teachers setting up modules. I don't know if any of your classes use module function. That's more of a K through 12 kind of thing. But modules took a ton of clicks for a teacher to set up. We needed to streamline that to like 3 or 4 because they were spending a lot of time having to build stuff up and pulling their hair out when we said, oh, well, we can make this easier by eliminating some of these things or combining dialogues or just making some assumptions. Then we get into controversial features. Confetti is one of my favorite ones. It's my favorite for 2 reasons. One, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Man, everyone's locked at home and they're sad. Wouldn't it be cool to celebrate when they get off the effort and turn in a piece of homework? Some of you guys have probably seen this here. Confetti's on here, so I've been told. You upload your homework, confetti comes down, celebrate. Woo! It's actually made such a big impression for the student body president for my daughter's school. That at graduation, during her speech, she ended it with like, we all feel good when we're turning in our homework at 11:59 and get the confetti, and she threw it. I was so excited. I started to turn my head towards my wife and she said, shut up. Because I get very geeked out about Canvas. The other one you see here, COVID invaders. You guys can play this today. Please do not tell everyone on earth. If you go to a Canvas URL and it is not found, hit your spacebar. You might get a game. We added COVID invaders. You can play that today. I actually took that screenshot last week. Again, just bring some joy, have some fun. There was a couple days when we were trying to get some product ideas together. That self-organization, figure out what we want to do. It takes a little bit of time to change gears that much. So one of the engineers who kind of does some game programming on his own said, I could add this for fun, did it, went out. You know what's the problem with this sometimes? When you have classroom full of middle schoolers who should be staring at Zoom paying attention, but they've all messaged each other, go here, press the space bar, and are competing for high scores. So almost immediately, we had to add a feature to disable this at schools at school's request. That brings another side lesson. Be careful what you name internal things, because internal names often leak out. For example, the ability to turn off COVID invaders was called Killjoy. One of our support people told a school administrator that. That did not end up well. So again, like in these pivot times, in these things where we're thinking like, hey, confetti, oh, I forgot to mention the downside to confetti. I was so excited about the geeky parts of confetti, I forgot to tell you the downside of confetti. We're a serious learning institute, kids. Oh, you can't have this, this is, they should turn this not a cause for celebration, turn it home, serious learning institution. So we had to turn off confetti at a number of schools. It was ridiculously, it's those things like, come on, this is fun. This doesn't hurt anyone. So you may have noticed, and he'll appear later in my presentation, in Canvas, you might notice a lot of pandas. Those are our unofficial mascots. We've actually, you probably see fewer pandas these days because again, serious learning institution, why is this cute panda here? Still all over the mobile app though, he's really great. I didn't really have couldn't find a good picture to go with this, so you get a picture of me. Act fast within the future. Before I get to the actual good content, I'll give you fun content. From March 13th to June 29th, every work day, I wore a different t-shirt because I own that many t-shirts and paired my background with it. You can see them all on Twitter if you find me on Twitter. So we acted really fast. As I mentioned, we dropped everything, organized. It was great for the customer. We did all these things. We stayed up. We added features like I just talked about. But a lot of our normal product discovery and validation was skipped over. Like, we think this is what we need. We don't have time to talk to people else. So why things are the way they are got lost because we're running so fast. Didn't do a lot of documentation. Here's a secret. Software engineers don't want to do documentation in the first place. When they're moving fast, they do it even less. I guess that's not really a secret. We ended up with a lot of half-owned projects, and that's really a problem that still haunts us today. So remember, I said a lot of our normal teams broke apart, and people self-organized, and then they built a thing. And then we said, hey, well, not pandemic's over, but our pandemic response, we can go back to more business as usual. Those teams broke apart. So now you have services that are kind of half owned by everyone or owned by no one. But your customers still depend on your services. So sometimes they find owners, but then the team that owns it, only one guy in this team worked on it. The other 4 people either need to learn or find to make time to learn, and that doesn't always happen really well. So that's some of that think of the future is when you build these things, make sure you know what's going to happen when you go back to normal, because we didn't think about that. That's one of those in retrospect. On the good side of thinking of the future, we had internally generated hundreds, thousands of ideas of ways that we could help customers. Some of them would have taken us 1.5 years. Like, oh, we can't do that. We want a rapid response. Or that's a great product idea for later down the road. Some of them were good, but not great. Some of them were whatever. So we generated hundreds of ideas, 10, 50, some smaller amount are what we actually pursued. And some of that was thinking in the future of, well, once you build a thing, and more importantly, once a customer uses a thing, really hard to take that thing away. So we tried to be a little bit judicious and slow it down. And that's where some of our changes and how we push software out came. Air for customer experience. This is my favorite video. That's from when we went public the first time. Panda was there, the bell ringing, making it ring. Schools value stability in crises. As I mentioned before, we don't want to spring new features in the middle of semester in normal year. We especially don't want to do it in the middle of everyone pivoting. We changed how we release stuff. We no longer had monthly releases. We kind of had on-demand releases. This feature's ready to go, but then we kind of had a panel of people. We had a whole separate branch. It still might be, if you look at Canvas in GitHub, that branch still might be there, the COVID-19 branch. And that is where we were very judicious in how we picked the features and patch sets that we were pushing out and went off that branch. There's complications that adds. Sometimes you miss, I'm taking this patch set, this PR, moving it over. oh, we missed one that it depended on. So we were judicious and really careful before we pushed stuff out. And that really changed how we deployed. As I mentioned, we deploy new code every other year. Honestly, or every other week. I mean, honestly, that's not entirely true. We sometimes with hot fixes, emergency fixes might be pushing out code every day. We're really good at deploying code most of the time, but we really put the brakes on for stability and for making sure we got the right things to the customer. We set up war rooms, which I had a better name. That's all I could really think of. We had all of our production engineers or site reliability engineers every morning in fall of 2020, sitting there watching every monitor and a team of engineers ready to jump in and do optimizations or whatever the second we saw something misbehaved. We really wanted that stability. We really wanted to make sure it was a good experience. We actually still do that starting in late August to about mid-September. Usually Tuesday through Thursday. It's weird. A lot of schools don't start on Monday. So Tuesday ends up being the really busy part in September. Another good lesson, and this is why Panda's here, making it rain. In the absence of good data, and we did not have good data in the spring, we threw a lot of extra money at Amazon. Thanks again, helping Jeff get to the moon. We threw a lot of money at Amazon to make sure there was the capacity. We over provisioned, we over capacitated all of the things that served our customers. We stood up extra databases. I was talking to some of the people internally as I was preparing this talk, and Bench, who mentioned that who appeared earlier in my talk, talking about 1% of the U.S. population using Canvas, said this, which I thought was really good. Staying up while expensive pays so many dividends in terms of customer loyalty and sales credit. We've been able to live on that for a couple of years. We were there, guys. We kept it up. Those other guys didn't. We were there helping education. Those other guys didn't. We had these responses. But our customers were also really thankful that we were there, and that helps keep them with us, which is great. I think way back at the beginning, I talked about the founding of the company, two guys who thought they could do better than the product they were using then. Company's initial mission, let's have more market share than the other one. We're now at 60% of the market. That's probably where we will be for quite a while. That's great. We are the largest player, but it's because of making decisions like this. The last one, it's kind of interesting. I was talking to one of our engineers last week, and he said this not in relation to the pandemic response, but I thought it was a good thing and a good lesson to maybe take from the pandemic response. Don't count on probability to avoid bugs. So talk about 2 million concurrent users before the pandemic. If a bug affects 1% of them, that's 200,000 people. 6 million concurrent users, and a bug affects 1% of them. We're now at more than the enrollment at this university. So, oh, this is unlikely, this won't happen. You can't count on that when you get to a certain level of scale and to a certain level of customer experience. Oh, another place we threw money at the problem, I almost forgot about this. I mentioned all the video transcoding that went out there. We used to have the capacity kind of locked to not cost us too much, and still be able to get videos out in time methods. We were falling further and further and further behind. So we really tripled that capacity to keep up with all that video that people were uploading into Canvas. Again, another case where I wish I had a better phrase for this, but add kill switching. Two great examples of places where we built in kill switches is our video partners I mentioned. They weren't ready, weren't keeping up, but the link would still be there in Canvas. And our customers would then call support and they would be having a bad time. So we built the ability that we knew when our video partners were having a bad day, we could turn off those links. That made the user experience better because then they weren't clicking on and waiting and wondering what was going on, or if their internet was broken, or if dad was upgrading the firewall and broke the internet in the middle of class. And that became a very valuable thing. Another one that was really interesting is when you log into Canvas, you might see, here's your to-do list, here are the assignments you have to do this. That query can be super expensive. And that query is done by everyone when they log in. So when databases were getting too hot, we built the ability to turn off those informational only queries. Made a slightly less good user experience, but the alternative was a worse user experience where everything was slow or not loading. So judiciously finding those areas, right? This is great, this is informational, but they can wait or they don't need it right now. Was a really useful tool for us. We also gave some tools to our users. Everyone, I mentioned the novice users, this goes to school administration as well. Everyone was working really fast. There's a tool called Student Information System. That's where, you know, your record of being a student and stuff is. That's on Canvas. And that information flows into Canvas and tells us the enrollments in classes. Some schools use a very manual process. They're uploading comma separated value files or whatever. And they were working really fast. Oh, we need to suddenly add people to these classes that weren't in classes, or we need to move people between classes. Or this is the online class, or this is the morning class and the afternoon class. And it's easy for humans to make mistakes. They pick the wrong files. They upload the same file twice. And so we're getting into situations where students were accidentally being removed from a class. Hence, our sweaty friend over there trying to decide to accidentally remove students from a class or cancel the import he just uploaded. There was no ability to cancel an import. There was no way for a user to go, oh man, I screwed up and I realized this like 5 seconds into it or a minute into it. Because sometimes those files can be huge and take a couple of hours to process. And when they get calls like, why is this student no longer in my class? They'd be able to act quickly and contain the error they were making rather than having it radiate out. But that was another, those other areas, like how can we help users stop when they've made a mistake to help them? I think that's that for that one. Third to last lesson. So we learned a lot about scale. As I mentioned, we doubled 2.5 times. We jumped up our concurrent users. The first quote I actually learned at this conference 12 years ago. I was here, I sat in on a talk from someone from Dropbox. Small problems or small performance issues become huge performance issues at scale. There are certain classes of being slow or inefficiencies in a database query, for example, that you can get away with for tens of users. But when it's hundreds of users or thousands of users, I speak from experience from the gradebook. Loading for if anyone's a TA in here and has used the gradebook, sorry. That's largely my fault. But we load all the students and we load all their submission data, like all their homework data. That's a lot of data. It can run super fast for 30 students. What if I'm in Econ 101 and that's 1,500 students? That becomes a little bit slower. And so we were going after those queries. Actually, one of the efforts that I led is the DBAs would give me every day, here are the top 10 hottest queries. These are the ones that are taking the longest or hitting the database the hardest. I would figure out what teams they belong with, and they would figure out, can we optimize them? Or where do your queries happen? Can we move them to our secondary databases? So this is actually some high-level architecture diagrams from Canvas. Looks kind of like any web app, no big secret here. This makes it look like there's a secondary database. So we have hundreds of clusters. Clusters usually have a bunch of schools on them. We try to separate the heavy hitters out and all that sort of stuff. A lot of managing where people's data is. But one of the things that we did is when we looked at those hot queries and we audited them all, do they need to be on the main database? Do they need to be on the read-write database, or can we move them to a secondary read-only database? So when we talk about that, like your to-do list query, which is expensive, it's now shared between a whole bunch of secondary databases. So we can actually keep that on now in a way that we couldn't before the pandemic. Another thing, a lot of this is on database, and this is a lot of where our scaling issues were really, we had okay database queries that were good for our capacity before the pandemic. We use Ruby on Rails, as I mentioned. Canvas is largely written on Ruby on Rails. Rails had, so Ruby's language with Rails as the framework. Rails within it, it has an object relational mapper called Active Record. Active Record is really great. I love Active Record. I actually like a good object relational mapping tool. I can write things that look like code, and then it writes SQL because I hate writing SQL. Most of the time, the SQL is reasonable. But a lot of times, as often as the case with computers, it's way terrible and way wrong. My favorite thing is when one of our DBAs, he lives in Poland, and he is a no-nonsense straight shooter. What is this crap? Why would anyone ever write a query like this? We're like, well, a human didn't write that query. The human wrote this Ruby code that looked reasonable, and it turned into a terrible query. So a lot of that top 10, those top ones, were like, should we throw away the magic and some of the flexibility that this framework gives us and just write raw SQL? That's a little more brittle. If so, like we have to change things by hand. If suddenly one of our data models has another field, we have to go in and edit this query. We can't just, it doesn't just get magically picked up by that object relational map. The other thing that comes out when you suddenly jump 2.5 times your normal scale, the ghost of tech debt past comes out. So as you guys may or may not know, tech debt are those things you're like, oh, this is not great, not correct. We need to fix this eventually. Scale is what eventually happens. We had so many things that we should have taken care of before. The thing that we like, the way that I put it to someone is the thing we've been putting off matters now. We can't put it off anymore. And so it's a constant battle in software engineering of addressing that tech debt or pushing out new features. Because I think it's famously said, bug fixes don't sell more product, new features sell more product. And so it's always that battle. But scale, when you know scale is coming, it's a good time to take tech debt into account. We didn't know it was coming because of that pivot. One of the other lessons, and this is more of a human lesson than a tech lesson, is take care of people. Many of you probably know Jackbox games. I was still very proud of my answer of office worker. A couple months into the pandemic, we were playing Jackbox games as a way to unwind with our teams. A job that doesn't exist now, but somebody probably has had in olden times. Office worker. Okay, I thought it was fun. Anyway. Remember I mentioned we broke all the teams. We said, go find the important thing to do and go do it. That works for some people. Other people have very different working styles. Some people need structure to thrive. One of my engineers had come to me and said, I don't know what the right thing to do. This is actually stressing me out more than the pandemic. I need to take tomorrow off. So what we had to do, what we needed to understand, if I had one thing to do in a magic wand and I could change the whole company, because it wasn't my decision to do this, wouldn't have been to go self-organize. Because that really did not work for some of our engineers. Already stressful time of who knows what's going on in the world, and then just added to it. And I look back at that as our number one. There's so many things I'm proud of and so many good things we did. That was our number one mistake, is we failed some of our engineers. The other thing is, a lot of people were working in the office at that time. We weren't remote first like we are now. And while we had the tools, a lot of people weren't used to always being separated from other people. The biggest difference, the way that I put it, is friction. I can turn to someone sitting next to me and go like, oh, hey, I'm running into this problem. What did you do for this? I'm at home, he's not next to me. So I have to fire Zoom or start a Slack chat or do whatever. And helping people be intentional with their communication and choose to overcome that friction. Some people would just rather sit and spin their wheels than go through that friction of asking help. We have to help people learn to get over that. Encourage self-care. On an airplane, put on your own mask before you help someone next to you. And it's that same thing. You cannot be in a good place to help other people if you're not already in a good place. We had people working, and I think I was one of them, 12, 14-hour days to try to keep stuff moving. And part of this, because we really do, a lot of us really care about the mission that we're doing. And so we're willing to pour that in. And we're willing to ignore how we're burning ourselves out. But we really have to encourage people to take care of themselves. I think that's true even in a normal case, in the normal going every day. Hey, you haven't taken a vacation in 2 years. That's probably not healthy. Go away from it. I've had that conversation with people. Assuming good intent is a good general rule of life anyway. But in this case, we had our customers who are also going through very stressful times, giving us very, let's call it pointed constructive criticism with passion. And so we had to go like, they're really spitting fire at us. But this is a teacher, maybe, who 40 years has been in front of a classroom, who's now trying to figure out how to make technology. I'm a scout leader, my son's a Boy Scout. Some of the parents of other scouts are teachers. One of the parents is like, oh, you work on campus. I'm like, that's clever. But again, his experience was that actually his wife, so the teacher, had no training and just like, oh, here's Canvas, go figure it out. School district failed her. But you have to assume, like, so I have to assume, even though I know he was needling me, where he's coming from was good intent. Last one, hi Dad. Don't annoy your children. It's my child. It was great. I had 2 users in my house. I could ask them everything about their experience. And did you get the confetti? And did this happen? And what's going on? It didn't end during the pandemic. We ate lunch at Murphy's. I already asked her some of those questions. But the thing that was exciting for me, and this little personal story, I worked in Instructure for 5 years before our local school district adopted. So finally, people I know were using this thing that I poured my heart and soul into for 5 years. 2 of them in my house. And I took advantage of that until they yelled at me. Actually, I think it was past when they yelled at me. It was when they yelled at me. But don't annoy your children. That's another lesson. And finally, have a sense of humor. About 2 weeks in the pandemic, this started floating around online on Reddit and a bunch of other places. First of all, I think this is hilarious. Also, I really thank whoever first did this, because thinking this looks like coronavirus is great, because the joke within the company used to be that this looks like a cat's rear end. I don't know who made the look. So, but you have to have a good sense of humor. People in marketing lost their minds. We have to respond to this. I can't believe people are doing this. Like, we're going to be associated with this. People are letting off steam. We've made the intentional choice not to publicly respond to this, which was the right choice. This was people having a good time and blowing off steam. You need to make choices not to respond to everything. This kind of goes back to that assuming good intent. But have a sense of humor. As best best job that you're doing, 14-hour days you're working, other people aren't going to appreciate it. My other thing that was my favorite thing to have a sense of humor about through this is students started to organize. Hey guys, if we go on the Google Play Store and on the App Store and on iPhone and give all the Canvas apps a 1-star review, they'll have to remove them. There were organized efforts by students, and if the apps are removed, we don't have to do school. There were organized efforts by students to review our apps, which is hilarious, because that is not going to not stop the school. That was one we did have to respond to a little bit, because we had to work with Google and Apple to make that work. But yeah, have a sense of humor. That's kind of my final lesson for you guys from what we did through the pandemic. So I know we started a little bit late because of the previous panel. We got about 3 minutes. I'll also be around for dinner, but like, hey, anything I can answer? Yes, sir.
So it's pretty clear that you are already on AWS. So so you know that there's a possibility that tomorrow Amazon might say that you have to pay us $10 million extra and you can do nothing about it, and that you're basically just locked into the whole Amazon situation. How do you plan on not being locked into Amazon?
I don't know if I am qualified to answer that, but I can answer it partially. We have contracts, we pre-purchase a lot of stuff. We also are operating in a volume where they would give us discounts, so we continue to operate at volume. But yeah, you're like, I mean, that's any vendor you choose can wake up one day and screw you. But if Amazon did that, I'm sure a company, I'm not saying we would, I have no idea if we have a contingency plan for this. So no one please quote me, don't get me fired. If Amazon did that, I as a company would probably be pretty loud about it. And then suddenly Amazon has fewer customers. It is very difficult. I think early on in our time with Amazon, we did try to be a little bit more, at least build in some platform agnostic to our cloud vendor choice. It's very difficult to do that and still operate at scale or use certain functions. The Amazon ecosystem, as Amazon as they are, is a really powerful ecosystem. There's so many good tools available. You can get a service up and running really quickly, fairly cheaply until you scale a lot. And it's a very powerful tool. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I personally don't know, thankfully not my department, what our plans are, but I know we have contracts and pre-purchasing of instances and all. There's all sorts of things you can do to keep Amazon costs manageable. But the other side of that coin, which I think is kind of interesting. So I mentioned a lot earlier, I've been at Instructure and we've been public twice while I was there, which is weird. One of the things that happened when we were bought by private equity is we did a lot of looking internally at our costs. So there are things you can do, you know, when you're in startup mode, throw money at the wall, make a shit ton of t-shirts, get, you know, throw all these features out there. We were like, I think we were a t-shirt factory for a while that also happened to make software. I have a lot of Instructure related shirts. But we took that time, like we really do a lot of good we now within engineering have a financial operations wing that kind of tracks our spending to make, you know, not only make forecasts, but also go like, oh, this suddenly jumped. What did you guys change? Is there something we can do for cost savings, or did the scale change or something like that? So we're at a maturity level as a company where we're paying close attention to that to avoid those situations.
What's like, I guess if you have, what's like a favorite feature that like one of your competitors have?
I honestly do not know our competitors that well. I can tell you a favorite feature that we've implemented in the past couple of years. So actually this happened in 2020 when schooling was going online. My son called me up and he said, hey, you got to sign, you know, you have to sign this document, some academic agreement, you know, and pulls up this thing and it's a PDF annotator and he goes to sign it. Now with Canvas, and this is one of my teams that did this, we have the ability to do annotations on a PDF. So traditionally, you'd upload, like that's very simple case. I upload an English paper, teacher leaves all sorts of comments on it in line in the document. I don't know if you guys have seen that. But like to sign documents and stuff like that, like they were going to a third-party tool. Like, well, we have software that does this. It wasn't exposed to the students. So way earlier, I talked about those novice users, the parents having to help students print out a paper so they can do the thing and then take a photo and upload it. You don't have to do that anymore. That's one of my favorite things that we did, because we already had the tool. We finally just took the time to expose it in a way. So now that circle all the math as assignment can all be done online. Circle with your mouse. It's a certain assignment type, but that one change is so enabling for kindergarten through 5th grade. That's actually another thing the pandemic allowed us to do. One, my product partner was already pushing for us to focus more on our usability for younger students. And that really gained some traction there. We're still doing work to get better there, but there's now a K-5 interface that can be turned on that looks different than the interface that you guys see. It's a lot simpler and more around like you're in a classroom, you know, when you're in grade school, you're in a classroom and you have math and whatever, but it's all in the same classroom versus like here in college, I have my courses. So it's kind of, you know, Canvas grew up first in the university space. And so now we're focusing on those K-5. I'm trying to think like of features that I'm trying to think if there's any feature I know of any of our competitors that we don't have. there's a lot of things we have chosen over my time in Instructure not to implement. Because it would add complexity. We try to keep, there's a lot of complexity in Canvas already. But what we try to do is try to keep it as simple as we can for the students. Like I know, like, as a teacher, someone setting up assignments, here are 20,000 checkboxes for getting answered. We're trying to make that easier. Student wise, one of the big things that you should see soon, and I don't remember if U of I has, might have already seen it. There's a new assignment interface that will walk you through like the homework, you know, when you upload homework and stuff. The original version of it had a pizza tracker. Your assignment is due. Your assignment is now waiting to be graded. But that's you guys will see some of that. But like I wish I could give you an answer, but I don't know a lot of our competitors.
All right, thank you guys. I'm sorry, but we're going to close it right